Welcome to today's Ethnic Media Services Zoom News Briefing. I'm Sandy Close. Our topic today is masks. Are we done with them? Some experts say masks continue to be an effective tool in containing the spread of COVID-19 infections. Other experts state that vaccines are the best prevention against infection and that masks are unnecessary. A recently released study from Cochrane Collaborative, an independent, nonprofit, highly respected medical research organization that does rigorous reviews of issues of the literature dealing with timely issues, casts doubts on the efficacy of N95 masks and P2 respirators as effective safeguards against COVID infections. The researchers state that wearing a mask may make little to no difference in how many people actually caught a flu-like illness, a COVID-like illness, according to data from 10 studies they reviewed. Our speakers this week will debate this continuing and contentious issue and provide advice for keeping children safe amid the ongoing health concerns we face. Now we begin, and we start with Dr. William Schaffner, who'll discuss the findings of the Cochrane study, add his own analysis of the conclusions and his recommendations on whether or not to continue masking. Welcome, Dr. Schaffner.
Hello, Sandy. It's good to be with you, for sure.
And it's great to see you take off your mask because it's so much easier to hear you without it.
Of course. The exact utility of masks has received a great deal of attention during COVID. And as you said, Sandy, the COVID collaboration, the Cochrane collaboration, named originally after a British epidemiologist by the name of Archie Cochrane, is very rigorous, and they do survey the world's medical literature on topics that are very timely and are under discussion. They are extremely meticulous, almost prissy in which studies they will actually include for review. So I go through all of this to let you know that although there are dozens of studies, some large, some small, some better, some not so well designed in the literature, the Cochrane collaboration finally decided only a very small handful of studies were sufficiently rigorous, and even they were not perfect, in order to review. And furthermore, most of these studies dealt not with COVID, but with influenza. So here we are. We have our best effort to indicate exactly how effective masks are, not in the healthcare, but in the community environment. And the Cochrane collaboration, for all the reasons I've said, comes out with a very conservative, cautious evaluation. They may be kind of right, but let me make some points. Let's look at the masks first. So whom do I think might seriously consider wearing a mask today when they are out in public? Well, let's look at the persons involved. We want to prevent serious disease serious enough to require hospitalization. and it's those patients for whom I'm most concerned. Yes, I would recommend older persons when they are out in the community in group settings, indoors, religious services, going to a basketball game, going to some sort of a convention and the like, to wear a KN95 or N95 mask. And then anyone with a notable underlying serious disease that we know predisposes to serious COVID and influenza, namely heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, for example. Pregnant women also. And in addition, anyone who is moderately or seriously immune compromised because of either their underlying illness or because of an immunocompromising medication they are taking. So it's a personal decision today. I have some gray hair. Do I wear a mask when I go to the supermarket? Yes. I must admit, in all honesty, when I went last Saturday, early morning, fewer people in the supermarket, there were fewer and fewer people wearing masks. In fact, last Saturday, I think I was the only one in the supermarket wearing a mask. In my neck of the woods here in Nashville, people want to get back to normal. But I offer the suggestion to the people in those high-risk groups. I think masks do offer a small but finite additional layer of protection to protect themselves when they are in such vulnerable circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have one question is, to what extent did masks actually prevent infections during the peak periods of the COVID spread? Because the Cochrane study seems to suggest that there's no evidence they actually prevented, although that would seem to be hard to prove.
It is hard to prove, and the Cochrane's conclusion is, of course, correct, because we didn't do just one thing. Yes, we wore our masks, but remember, we were also social distancing. And indeed, during certain periods of COVID, in certain communities, we were in a lockdown. We stayed home. So we did all those things more or less simultaneously, and it's hard, impossible, really, to determine what proportion of the reduction we saw in COVID was due to the mask itself.
I am delighted to welcome Dr. Gandhi.
Well, thank you so much. I am completely in agreement with Dr. Schaffner that vaccines are actually the strongest form of protection against severe disease from COVID-19, and have been very impressed with the vaccine effectiveness and how we are where we are in this pandemic now with actually very little severe disease. We really went through a winter, and that's the time to stress a pathogen. And we saw a lot of RSV, we saw flu, but the severe disease with COVID-19 was so much lower during this last winter. And that is because of population immunity, both from the vaccine, preferably, but also there's a lot of natural infection. So the question here for this meeting is about masks and the Cochrane review. And I was actually very interested in masks for the first year of the pandemic and wrote a piece in spring of 2020 for the New England Journal, really urging masks. But my interest in masks were around the concept of masking and reducing the severity of disease. If you're getting in less virus, the theory was that could you have less inoculum and would there be less severe disease? And there's some data that supports that. But the question on the table now is whether there's enough evidence that masks reduce transmission at a population level to impose mask mandates. That's one question. We can talk about individual masking in a minute. Let's just talk about mask mandates. And I think that the Cochrane review was not just data during influenza. Actually, they were very careful to look at studies during COVID. And you're right that they are very rigorous, and they considered RCTs, or randomized controlled data, the highest level of evidence that they were going to review to make a recommendation that, or to determine if mask mandates made a difference. And there are three major randomized controlled trials that were performed during this pandemic. One was in Denmark early on about individual level masking, published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, called the DanMask study, that showed no effectiveness of masks. And I wrote a letter to the Annals of Internal Medicine and said, this is not the way to study masks. You don't put it on an individual, rely on them wearing it when no one around them is wearing it. There were no mask mandates in Denmark at the time. And so you're embarrassed to wear it and you're not going to wear it. And it's all about adherence. So we need a cluster randomized study to look at this question. We need to randomize villages or towns or, big groups to wearing masks versus not. And that was actually performed. It was the Bangladesh RCT of masking at a population level, cluster randomized trial, providing masks, teaching on masks to one village. Everyone's wearing the same mask, so they're all wearing it, versus not. And there was very little effectiveness. I'll explain it a little bit more, but cloth masks made no difference. We pretty much know this by now. Cloth is not the right way to stop transmission. And surgical masks were a bit better. There was a small effectiveness for the villages that wore surgical masks, probably because surgical masks are made out of polypropylene material, which are negatively charged. They reject the virus. But then, unfortunately, to be fair, a reanalysis of the Bangladesh data, which was published in Science, people got the raw data, reanalyzed it, and said, no, there's no effectiveness. And that RCT did not show the effectiveness of population level masking. And then finally, there was one in Guinea-Bissau recently, no effectiveness, but that was cloth masks. So where do we stand then for the pandemic at this moment? I don't think we can impose mask mandates on the public anymore. This is not enough level of evidence to mandate. So then it's Dr. Schaffner's question, should individuals wear masks? And the best science on this is physical science studies. If you wear the right type of mask and it's really clamped down and it's a respirator or it's a KN95, KF94, FFP2, really strong fit and filtered mask on mannequin studies with particles being bombarded into those mannequins, it looks like these masks really do block virus. And I think that anyone who would like to can choose to wear a mask and can be encouraged to wear a mask. My father's different. He's 88. He's had 5 doses of the vaccine and he does not mask like you do, Dr. Schaffner, but that's because he is hard of hearing. He had an accident and he's hard of hearing and it's harder for him to wear a mask. And so let's make it a personal choice at this point. And I think the one thing I've been really interested in from kind of a public health standpoint, and I live in California, which is very different than Tennessee, where we had a lot of mask mandates, a lot of lockdowns, a lot of vaccine mandates, but we also had distrust. And I am really interested moving forward in increasing trust in public health because we have so much to deal with. We have avian flu someday. We have HIV funding that we want to continue. So I always think in the world, where can we increase our trust? If the evidence is not high enough at this point to impose mask mandates. I would not do it. But I think we can encourage vulnerable populations, if they'd like to mask with the physical science study data. But I don't think it can be mandated.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to go to our third speaker, Dr. Mina Hakim. And Dr. Hakim is the pediatrics specialist of the South Central Family Health Center, which has been a great resource for us in these briefings. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Hakim will discuss the findings of the study as they relate to children. Dr. Hakim, welcome.
Hello, everybody. I just want to start with saying I'm honored to be in here with such distinguished colleagues, but I am not a researcher. I just want to give you that caveat. I am a primary care doctor, and I work basically in a very heavily populated South Central area as a pediatrician. So I guess I can give you my experience and my view from basically what we call like down in the trenches. So first of all, there was a few questions that I just wanted to clear up. A couple of questions that I saw in the chat, comparing the Cochrane review to other papers. It's important to know that the Cochrane review is not just one paper that did one study. It's a collection. It looked at all of the studies. It looked at a collection of studies. I think it was 70-something studies, 610 participants, 610,000 participants, and it was very rigorous, as Dr. Schaffner said, in a selection of the studies that can make it into that. So comparing it to other just one single study is just not fair. So it is a collection of studies that looked at many papers. So as everybody had already said, Dr. Schaffner and Dr. Gandhi, the results of the study was clear in that surgical masks, N95 masks, did not make a difference in the transmission of viral illnesses. That's COVID or the flu. Now, specifically regarding children, the study did look at a few studies that were specifically for children, and these results were even worse. And as we already saw with Dr. Gandhi and Dr. Schaffner were saying, the limitation of wearing masks is how to use it. So masks is a mode of prevention that in theory is an excellent mode of prevention, but in practice it's not. So imagine if you had to give yourself your own vaccine. If you walked in and they just handed you a syringe and they told you, go ahead and give your own vaccine. We don't know how to use vaccines. The general public does not know how to give themselves vaccines. It won't work. They won't know how to mix it. They won't know how to give it. They won't know how to appropriately give it. So we're basically we gave the public a piece of equipment and we told them, hey, this prevents infections in theory, but go ahead and use it however you want to use it. So, and especially for children, you can't do that. Kids are the worst at keeping things on. No matter how many attachments you have, how many attachments you have, you'll be lucky if you have a kid with their pants on at the end of the day. So, let alone having a mask on that increases humidity, increases difficulty of breathing, and is just overall uncomfortable on the ear, uncomfortable on the head. They're touching things, they're wiping their nose, they're taking it off to drink and eat. They're sharing pencils and pens that have been in other kids' mouths. And, that's not in all ages, but, teenagers as well are horrendous at being compliant. So as far as children in general, the study was worse overall outcome for children. Should we continue asking children to wear masks? I get that question in my own practice a lot, and we shouldn't force them to wear masks. I think we should educate them that mask is a small puzzle, a small piece of a very, very large puzzle. We would encourage to do vaccinations and other measures I'll get into to prevent. But no, we shouldn't force, or we shouldn't put that on children. Now there's kids that have asthma severely, kids that have immunocompromised for one type of disease or another. And I would encourage the parents of these kids to have that conversation with their kids and continue wearing a well-fitted N95 mask if it's possible for them, because it is a very small piece of the puzzle, but in a larger context, as Dr. Schaffner was saying, it can make a big difference. Now, if you know your kid is not gonna be able to cooperate and they're taking it off, they're touching their face, they're sharing drinks, they're doing all of those things, then it's probably not a smart idea to be doing that in the first place. The study didn't only look at masks. The study also looked at hand sanitization versus soap versus surface sanitization. Although these were smaller aspects of the study, it did look at it. They found that hand hygiene, especially with hand sanitizer, was effective by about 11 to 14% reduction in transmission. And they only looked at a few papers that looked at surface sanitization, and they did find that surface sanitization can reduce the risk for transmission. So my recommendation as moving forward, of course, schools should not be mandating masks. Masks should be a choice. If it is a choice, please use a well-fitted N95 mask and in very high-risk patients. But the better things is good hand hygiene and good sanitization in the school. So surfaces, places that kids touch, often toys, utensils, pens, books, all those things can sanitizing these things, because as Dr. Schaffner said, the transmission is contact, so droplets. So you sneeze on something, it can stay there for a long time, someone can touch it, and then it gets transmitted. So it's not just aerosolization in the air, it's not just in the air, it's things that you touch, and you touch your mouth, you touch things that you eat, things like that. And then good screening. Good screening for kids that come into the school. Have you had fevers? Are you sick? So, the less amount you are around other kids or other people that are sick, the less likely you'll have transmission. So as far as surgical masks or masks in general for children, the study was clear in that for children it's even worse results than they had for the general public.
Thank you, Dr. Hakim. A kind of wrap-up question. And for me, the most important kind of issue that all of this raises is what each of you has spoken about as trust in the public health system. To what extent have these new findings about masks affected the public?
One of the most difficult things for the general public to understand is that we will give you our best advice today, but if we learn something tonight, we may have to change that advice tomorrow, and that this is an ongoing process. That's why, when asked, many public health authorities will say the single most important aspect of dealing with a pandemic or any public health threat is communication. Clear, science-based, repeated, and once again, clear, given in language that people understand. We've learned more about masks during these 3 years of COVID. We're changing our minds. We're giving better advice. We're trying to communicate this right now. We in public health, all three of us and others, partner with journalists to provide the best information to the general public. We try to do that in a sustained way, factually, but also in a reassuring fashion. And we're going to have to keep trying to do that. It's the best way that I know how.
Dr. Gandhi, your thoughts on this?
Science is a process of iteration, of change. And all we can do in public health is be clear when there's been a change, say sorry if we were too heavy-handed in some ways, and we are going to do our best in the next pandemic.
Thank you. I think what all of us who've been on these briefings with the three of you have come to develop is a real trust in the information you're sharing with us. Many of us do not have personal doctors. Not only are we in a position of having to inform our audiences as best we can, but we ourselves rely to some extent on these briefings to inform ourselves. Thank you so much.